Hey guys, 1 week of the election, more or less, under our belts. It is the Line Podcast, Mark Carney and Jen Gerson with you once more from Toronto and Calgary. It is March 28th, 2025. Coming up in the show today, Mark Carney breaks up with America. And yeah, kind of. Why are people surprised by this? State of the race, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what we think of Carney. We're going to talk about what we think about Polyev. We're going to mention someone we haven't heard of at all. And when we mention his name, you might go, oh yeah, him. We're also going to wrap up by talking about the simmering conservative civil war in this country. Starting to get up to a boil. All that and more on the latest episode of the Line Podcast. This episode of the Line Podcast is brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and increasing regulations, today, nearly 4 million Canadians still smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco, vaping products, and oral smokeless products provide a potentially less harmful choice. Smoke-free alternatives do not involve combustion or burning, like smoking a cigarette does. Instead of heavily restricting access and information about these options, Canada's government should be adopting common-sense legislation that will help further bring down Canada's smoking rates and put information in the hands of Canadians. Information such as the relative risks compared to cigarettes. Because the products are not the same, and they shouldn't be treated the same. It's just common sense. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at Unsmoke.ca. So, I was at a diner on Friday morning. I had a lot of work to do, but it was all busybody paperwork. And I figured, screw it, I'm going to take my laptop. I'm going to go have someone make me a nice breakfast. Won't have time to eat lunch today, so I'll eat a big breakfast and I'll work. And up on the screen in the diner, and I have no idea how many people were paying attention to or not, was a Toronto all-news 24-hour-day station, and it was running on a loop over and over and over. Liberal leader Mark Carney's comments about Canada's relationship with the United States. Not being over, because we still have a relationship with the United States, but the old relationship of ever closer economic and military ties is done. And
so can we just quote him directly?
Jump in. You have the quote ready?
Yes, I do. Quote, the old relationship we had with the United States based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation is over, he told reporters. The time will come for a broad recognition of our security and trade relationship. I'm glad that we're starting with this today because I do feel like this one is making the rounds. This punch is hitting the international news outlets. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about your response to it. Can I be honest? I didn't even tweak to the quote.
Yeah.
Do you want to know why I didn't tweak to the quote?
Probably for the same reason I didn't react to it either, because it's a statement of the obvious.
It's not a shift in policy, man. That's a statement of fact, and it's been an obvious statement of fact for the last 3 months. And I'm sorry if the Americans have just clued into the fact that, like, the stuff that they do has consequences.
Years ago, a buddy of mine, I'm going to be vague on this one for reasons you'll quickly understand. His wife left him in a pretty dramatic way. There was no ambiguity. It would be sort of like him relaying what had happened to us and us going, "You're leaving your wife?" No, she was gone. She was real gone. And I think there were a couple of interesting reactions people had to Carney's comment that Jen has read here. And one of them was, it is not appropriate for a caretaker prime minister to be making bold foreign policy announcements. And I'm actually somewhat sympathetic to that.
Okay, I can hear that. I can hear that argument.
But I think the reason I'm only somewhat sympathetic to that is because it's not like a caretaker prime minister woke up this morning and is like, you know what would really benefit my campaign? If I generate some problems with the United States. And I'm saying this, Jen, in a way that is not particularly torqued and is not particularly hostile to the Americans. I'm just acknowledging their foreign policy decisions. You know, the United States has altered on its own accord its own foreign policy and defense policies and economic policies. And I think it's a statement of the obvious for Mr. Carney to go, the old relationship is over. And I think we can still have a great relationship with the Americans. It's going to take some work.
Let me just say this. So you elect on a president who threatens our sovereignty, declares effectively economic war against us, starts demanding that we become the 51st state, constantly derides our democratically elected leaders, tears up the UMSCA agreement that we signed only a few years ago, and starts laying on tariff after tariff. The Canadians didn't Mark Carney's not affecting some policy change with the Americans. The Americans have broken the relationship with us, and Carney is stating the obvious state of play. I think the only thing that's unique about this, the only reason why even some Canadians are responding to this, is because, one, we're not used to politicians speaking to us this frankly about what the world is. We're not actually used to politicians talking to us assuming that we're adults. So that's unique. And secondly, I think that there are still a few Canadian conservative MAGA types who are in denial about this. And I think it's actually at this point psychological denial. I think it's, if you are denying that that the actions of the Americans are going to fundamentally change the nature of their relationship with their allies, and that this is what that looks like, these are obvious consequences for that, you're either in denial about the world, you're in denial about Trump, or you're an American who operates under the assumption that you can do whatever you want because you're totally insulated from consequences because fuck yeah, and America and foreigners aren't real people. If you do things in the world, other people in the world will do things in response.
I think that has been a missing ingredient in the Trump White House. And there was an interesting comment by the president this week. I thought it was genuinely really interesting. It was one of his middle of the night Truth Social posts where he warned Canada and Europe against retaliating. First of all, interesting.
Yeah.
Secondly,
it's always great to advertise your weaknesses and your fears that way. Thank you for that, Mr. Trump. Really appreciate that.
We'll just jot that one down in the old
jot that one
planner.
down.
But I also think it's interesting because one of the things I've just been fascinated by, again, I'm going to be as neutral as possible here. America has the right, as you and I have often said, to choose its own destiny. Mm-hmm. And that has the right to pursue its own national interests in military and economic and foreign policy.
Yep.
But what I think they have been, sorry, this is going to be grammatically awkward. They have been surprisingly surprised by the fact that other countries also have national interests.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know yet if we have landed, Canada and the Europeans, I guess. I don't know if the collective remaining Western alliance has yet landed on a plan for Trump that is within our collective national or alliance interests, but we're going to do something. It's political physics. What we might do might be stupid, might be harmful, might be counterproductive, and it might be ineffective, but it's not going to be passive acceptance. And I think that's something the White House didn't understand.
Well, look, it just always amazes me when I listen to American intellectuals who are kind of justifying what Trump is doing under the aegis of that this is all real politique. He understands, he's 4D chessing this. This is all real politique, and yet getting shocked and flustered when the world real politiques them back. I'm sorry, you want to play that game, the rest of the world is going to get real too. Other teams get to play this sport. You get that, right? But it's like a lot of the guys who are actually in the White House and ruling them, who come from, Ivy League educations, who are coming from the upper echelons of society in a lot of cases, not exclusively, but a lot of cases, seem very insulated from the concept of geopolitical consequences. And I think that is a reflection of the insulated role that America has had, both economically and geographically, for a really long time.
And academia.
Pardon?
And academia.
And academia. There you go.
You're a couple of rungs up the ladder on that one.
Yeah, exactly. So like, look, these people aren't poor. They don't have to suffer the actual material consequences of tariffs. It's not going to hurt them. They're going to get richer on it. And they're never going to they and their kids are never going to be sent off to war. They're never going to have to suffer consequences. So therefore, when consequences, even in the abstract, become apparent, it's like they're shocked. I mean, the thing that still gets me is like, okay, so I'll make this straight. You're a president who's threatening to turn us into the 51st state, threatening our sovereignty, and planning to go to economic war for us, but you lost your minds because we booed you at a hockey game? How dare they? What's wrong with you people?
I don't know
How
if
dumb
you saw.
are you?
I don't know if you saw this. The readout was released this morning just before you and I started recording. I don't know if you'd have seen it yet, but the president and the Liberal leader, Mark Carney. And if people are wondering why we keep referring to them as Liberal leader, not prime minister, it's tradition during the election period. We do not grant the status of the title. We refer to them as party leaders. Mm-hmm. So the Liberal leader and the president spoke this morning, I think it was, and there was a readout of the call. And what was interesting was that the president's Truth Social post was respectful. It was brief, It was terse, but there was no Governor Trudeau, there was no 51st state. It was spoke today with Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, had a productive talk, agreed on many things, looking forward to working together.
Yeah, no governor, Mark Carney.
So I think, Jen, and this is, and I'm not trying to dunk on our own podcast here. Like, I think you and I are both very much in a place where we want to talk about the Americans as little as possible. Mm-hmm. But this was an interesting one. And we're going to talk about the campaign itself in the next segment. But I will note that I thought the president's response to Mark Carney's phone call this morning was really interesting. And I don't know why I think it's interesting. Sorry, this is terrible podcast content. But it was just, I went, that's a signal. And I don't know yet what it's signaling.
Well, because it could signal two very different things. We know that Donald Trump has explicitly stated that he'd prefer Carney over Poilievre. Mm-hmm. He stated this openly, and I think that that's rooted in the, as we stated last week in the podcast. What was the phrase we used? It was heretics are hated more than infidels, right? Like. Carney's an infidel, but Pierre's a heretic. Mm-hmm. Pierre should be on Team Trump, but he isn't, and that makes him worse. So it could be that simple. It could be very well that Trump actually prefers dealing with Carney because he knows what he's dealing with Carney, whereas Pierre Poilievre is conflicted in his mind. And so he's setting Carney up to be a more credible leader. Like he's responding respectfully to Carney, knowing that this could help him. It could very well be that he thinks that Carney is the weakest choice and that he can handle Carney more effectively. And so therefore he's trying to help him. It could also be that Carney actually showed some spine to Trump and Trump responded accordingly. Like, I don't know what it's a signal of. I don't know if it's a signal of the fact that Carney is better equipped to deal with Trump, or if Trump just wants us to believe that Carney is better equipped to deal with him. Or, like, you know what I mean? Like, we get into, like, the 4D chess speculation now. I don't know what the answer is there.
I don't go down loops of Trump's cognition.
Yeah. It's probably the simplest thing you could think of. What's the simplest answer there? The simplest answer there is that
he had a strong personal dislike of Justin Trudeau.
Yeah. Yeah. And for some reason Carney managed to hit the right note with Trump.
Or maybe, possibly, or maybe any generic Canadian would accept a Trudeau or a Trudeau person. Like, I don't think a Freeland would have gotten a neutral readout either.
No, but not Poilievre, apparently.
It's possible. I wonder. I honestly don't know, but I do think there was a degree of, the funny thing is too, based on some of what I know from behind the scenes, I'm not convinced Trump and Trudeau hated each other on a personal level. I mean, probably by the end they did. But I do think the president took an almost vicious bullying pleasure out of tormenting Trudeau. Mm-hmm. And the thrill just might not be there for Carney. And I want to pick up. I want to just loop back a couple of minutes because you were talking about there being pockets of denial in conservative Maple MAGA on the fringe there. One of the things I think is interesting, again, sitting in a diner eating my toast and looking at this clip on a loop, was thinking about the fact that I still think a lot of Canadians, fewer now, but a whole heap and helpful, are still struggling to keep up with the new reality. And I wonder if some of the reaction is that Mark Carney said at a lectern what a lot of Canadians have been wondering about in the backs of their minds. You and I are broken in ways that allowed us to make a pretty quick pivot.
Oh, yeah, he's saying stuff that was obvious to us 3 months ago. Like, yeah. And in fact, bluntly, I'm kind of pissed off because it wasn't obvious to Canadians 8 years ago that this was changed. Like,
I mean, how much emotional energy am I supposed to invest in being angry at Canadians being Canadians? I wrote expectations are a problem for a reason.
Yeah, fair enough. Can I also just note that, like,
I choose to have grace for myself and not be angry about that today.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, the other interesting thing was I've seen in my sort of extended circle people who were pro-Trump in Canada, conservative, strong yeah, he's gonna tear down the ropes kind of thing, right?
He's gonna save girls' sports.
He's gonna save girls' sports and tear down the wokes. I've seen a lot of those people fundamentally turn on Trump when they suddenly realized that, oh shoot, he's not in it for me. I'm not on his team. The leopard's eating my face now. These guys assume that Trump was they had allegiance to a kind of pan-national conservative movement. And now all of a sudden they're realizing, oh, I guess the national part mattered, didn't it? Yeah?
Because there's something I'm not going to say on the air. I'm going to tell you at a break, but it brings to mind a lyric that would probably get us canceled. So I'm going to save it.
Let's save it.
But I think what you're talking...
What's interesting, though, because those people actually aren't even afraid of Trump. They're angry.
Oh, they're betrayed.
They're betrayed. They've been betrayed by the broader conservative pan-national movement. And now you're turning on us. We were your people. You know what I mean? Like, that's the energy. Like, it's these people who suddenly realize and clue in that Trump wasn't in it for them. There's a sense of palpable betrayal. And that's coming from, like, a faction of the conservative side. It's really interesting.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I'm just going to add on to it. There is still a broader demo in Canada that is more still, but I can't go golf in Arizona now. And by the way, you can. Your neighbors just might look at you funny. That's all.
Or you might get detained at the border for 10 days. Have fun with that.
A broader part of this conversation, though, which is interesting, and you and I have talked about this before, it's not dramatic yet, but we've commented a few times in recent episodes that I think Trump is starting to run into exactly what we said would happen, that he was going to pick 1,000 fights and then start getting tied down in them. Mm-hmm. I have still been surprised by the lack of organized resistance in the United States, or put it another way, the resistance, right? Because that was a whole thing in Trump 1. It hasn't really gotten organized yet, but I'm looking at even podcasters in the manosphere, Republican governors in northern states, Republican senators, more so than House reps. House reps seem more MAGA-y than the Senate for reasons I think are understood. But there's kind of growing, why are we picking a fight with Canada? Why are we doing this? Is this what we ought to be doing? And that you probably, I've been arguing with you to get off social media because you've fallen off the wagon a little bit. And we're going to talk about that later.
Just a little.
But have you seen the campaign of billboards that the Canadian government is funding in large U.S. cities? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tariffs are a tax. You're paying for it. Brought to you by the government of Canada. I'm paying for those ads. I'm okay with that. Like, take my money, please. So, absolutely.
I don't think they're as effective as they probably could be. I think we should probably be hiring some better creative on that. But yeah,
they're very Canadian. I do like the big tariffs are a tax. I do like that.
Yeah, but it makes it sound like it's a tax on us.
You pay the tariff tax.
Yeah, your grocery bills brought to you by Donald Trump. Like, we need to be way more aggressive about this. If we're going to go here, let's go here. Take the gloves off.
Every
But
week we
no,
get
we
closer
can't.
and closer to just opening our own political ad agency.
Oh, God. Wouldn't that be fun? Anyway.
Yeah, but no.
I mean, if we could do stuff like try to psyop the Americans into maybe rethinking their tariff wars, I could be persuaded.
I do think Americans are rethinking the tariff wars, and there's been polling this week. I think it was it Ledger that did some. I think it was Ledger. I don't recall, but polled Americans to find out how interested they would be in having their state become a province, and there were way more Americans who would prefer to be annexed by Canada than vice versa.
Yes,
So
that you could have fun with those ads.
we're coming,
We
America.
should, okay,
You have provoked the sleeping giant.
further to asshole nation. Why don't we start an actual campaign to like
Annex Maine?
succeed to Canada, secede to Canada?
Who's our target? I would go Michigan and Maine. Well, Maine first. Maybe Connecticut?
Yeah, well, you got to get the border. You got to get all the border states, right? Like,
Wouldn't it be funny if we grabbed like a completely contiguous southern state, like
yeah,
Arkansas
like,
became a
what? Yeah,
province?
no, what if we could do literally just like do the Cascadia Dream? Just bring in
California, Oregon, and
California, Oregon, and Washington. Yeah. What if we just did an active campaign to get these people to vote to leave the Union and come to Canada?
I had a really dark joke that went over my kid's head this week, but my daughter is studying geography, and she told me she now knows all 50 states. And I'm like, 63, honey, 63. And she was like, what? I was like, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I do think it's just interesting because I'm just watching and waiting. And when I'm looking at Kaylee Rogers wrote a guest post over at Paul Wells' Substack this week, and she raised an interesting point that in contrast to how the story is unfolding here, U.S.-Canada tensions is a rounding error story in the United States. Like it's nobody cares.
Yeah.
To the extent that people know about it, they mostly disapprove of it. To the extent that they're worried about other things, it's not a big issue. But I just think even so,
given our size, that doesn't strike me as unusual or abnormal.
it's exactly what I would have
Yeah,
expected.
absolutely.
But it's still interesting to see an increasing number of prominent Americans, even on the right, going, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And I don't know. You know what? Look, the line does not pedal in groundless optimism. It's not our stock and
Our
trade.
style.
But I actually could lay out a scenario here that is not nothing you and I wouldn't have predicted. I mean, I think one of our leaderboard scenarios, we've talked about that in recent weeks,
Yeah.
kind of how our leaderboard keep adjusting. One of the scenarios that's always been on the board is that the White House comes out strong, the allies consolidate and get their act together a little bit, at least have the appearance of consolidating and getting their act together. And the president gets bogged down in domestic policy matters, and he's got a razor-thin congressional majority. Domestic U.S. politics could very easily be what saves us. Not necessarily by reversing what's happened, but at least by freezing it in place. Gives us time to go do the things we, in theory, say we'll be doing.
I mean, and in theory, that's great, but I still don't think that you can avoid, and again, I'm going to use Mark Carney's own quotes here, the old relationship we have with the United States based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations is over. Yeah? Because even if that's true, and even if their own domestic policies take over and we're not that important to them in the long run, they've demonstrated that to us so effectively that there will be no one who's alive today who will not learn this lesson. And that is, you cannot trust the neighbors to the south. And it doesn't matter if they're Democrat, doesn't matter if they're Republican. That degree of fundamental distrust, now that it's broken, can never be fixed. It cannot be. So we're going to have to make different decisions about how we function in the world. And we're going to have to make different decisions about how we function vis-a-vis the Americans, because they're not a trustworthy partner. If it's not Trump, it'll be Vance next time, and we have to prepare ourselves for that. So the current that Trump represents is real, active, and live. So even if he doesn't get what he wants in this term, we're forever on the outs, and we can never forget that, ever.
We're going to forget
Ever.
it so fast.
Well,
We're going to forget it so fast.
We'd be in such a stronger position if we had learned that lesson in 2017 and 2018, wouldn't we? But we didn't.
Because
we're dumb.
Yeah.
And because we want things to go back to normal, and everything's just nice when the Americans and we just get along. It's just nicer that way. Anyway, look, we can't be nice anymore. I don't know.
Asshole nation.
Asshole nation. This is what it is. I got nothing else to say on this. Carney's stating the obvious. Duh. Moving on.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
For hundreds of communities across Canada, forestry is a lifeline, supporting 200,000 workers, $87 billion in annual revenues, and $37 billion in exports, $29 billion to the United States. But it's more than just a driver of our economy. It's key to addressing some of our biggest challenges. We need an action plan for our forest sector and its employees, one that will help build the homes we need with Canadian wood, reduce the risk of wildfires, and create more family-supporting jobs right here at home. To learn more about what forestry can do for Canada, visit forestryforthefuture.ca.
Okay, we're going to talk about the state of the race. We are going to talk specifically about Carney attack ads and why we don't think that they are landing very successfully. Matt, do you want to take the lead on this one? Okay, so firstly, right off the bat, I think we should say that neither you nor I are politically naive about the role that attack ads have to play in politics. Mm-hmm. Parties use them because they work. The conservatives,
they deplore them, but they all use them.
They all use them. The conservatives are in particularly dire straits. Carney is very much an unknown to the population. They have to get out of the gate with attacks by presenting the flaws in his personality and character. Mm-hmm. Neither of us are going to clutch our pearls at the fact that the conservatives are engaging in attacks against Carney. But I will say, Matt, it does seem a little bit like maybe they didn't spring for the good Oppo file.
Yeah, they got two new Oppo.
Like this maybe does seem a little bit like they got the intern to do it, because the attacks aren't great. It's not to say that there haven't been any or that Carney's a perfect angel of light, but I want to talk about the Brookfield stuff, and I want to talk about the plagiarism stuff. So I think we should talk with the Brookfield stuff. I think the most potent attack that they've had on Carney to date has been the note that when Carney was board chair at Brookfield, which is, of course, is a massive, massive multinational corporation and investment company. Carney moved Brookfield's headquarters from Toronto down to, I believe, to New York, I believe, right? New York? Am I remembering that? Okay, good. And this does not sit comfortably with his, pro-Canada all the way economic nationalism.
Yeah, elbows up, Brookfield out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's a fair attack. I think that's a fair critique.
Me too.
Also, I think it should be noted that Carney has not been particularly honest about the role that he had in that. He kind of was like, well, that wasn't me, blah, blah, blah. Turns out data came out that he was a pretty active advocate for the relocation of Brookfield. That's an issue. The other stuff, I think it's fair to criticize Mark Carney about whether or not what he has in his blind trust, and whether or not a trust can ever really be totally blind, and whether or not he stands to benefit from this or that. The reason why I think that's fair but not an effective attack is that I don't think anyone seriously believes that Mark Carney is becoming Prime Minister of Canada to make money. I don't think that that's his motivation here, guys. Yeah. I don't think he's running for Prime Minister in order to increase his stock portfolio by 8%. I think that he could just make more money doing stuff for Brookfield if that's what was motivating him here. So I don't think that works. The other attacks that I think have come out is they're trying to pin every single thing that Brookfield's ever done, every single evil capitalist exploitative trick, including tax havens in Bermuda.
Mark Carney in a desk stamping all of them with a theatrical flourish.
Okay, here's where I think that attack is fair. Yeah, Brookfield is behaving in a way that a typical multinational corporation investment firm behaves, and that includes using tax havens in Bermuda. And tax havens are tax evasion, or not tax evasion, because that makes it sound illegal. They're tax avoidance strategies. They're tax
My
efficiency
accountant has
strategies.
described them as efficiency strategies.
Yeah, efficiency strategies. Okay, like, look, I mean, look, there's only one reason to put an aspect of your investment firm in Bermuda.
A profound appreciation for Bermudian culture.
Yeah, or maybe you're making a play in shellfish or commercial dolphin meat.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. No, I mean, come on now. That's absolutely what he's doing. It's a tax avoidance strategy. I think that it's fair to criticize him not because he's doing that, because in his role as chair, he's acting with a fiduciary responsibility to Brookfield and to its shareholders, so he's maximizing their returns. I think what it is fair to criticize him for is that he's coming from a class of people who treat tax havens as normal and okay. And I don't think they're normal, and I don't think they're okay. I think they're a scam that major corporations that have the funds to do so use to get out of paying the taxes properly owed to the businesses where they have the bulk of their business interests. It's not illegal. Is it unethical? Yeah, I think tax havens are unethical. Fine. It's fair to criticism in this. One other thing that came up during the Brookfield Oppo stuff was like Brookfield got a bank from the loan of China. Okay, again, Brookfield is
Loan
operating.
from the Bank of China. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, okay, sure. Okay, maybe companies shouldn't be taking monies from the loan from the Bank of China. Okay, fine. But again, trying to say that like Mark Carney or implying that Mark Carney is the single puppet master, running a mom and pop hedge fund, making these nefarious, dastardly decisions. No, he's a guy on a board on a massive multinational firm making decisions that anybody in charge of that firm would be making. So is it fair? Yeah, I think it's fair to point some of this stuff out. Is it effective? No. And the reason why I think it's not effective for a reason, and that's because people already know that this dude's a rich banker. The idea that he's done rich banker shit is kind of baked into the asking price at this point.
Yeah, maybe. I was going to go a slightly different direction. You could be right. But the direction I was going to go into is the conservative campaign. We've spoken about this at length. We'll probably talk a bit more today. But anyone who's been listening to us in recent weeks knows what our thoughts are on the conservative campaign. They're fighting the campaign they would have thought they were fighting 6 months ago. Yeah. The campaign they would have been fighting 6 months ago, tax shelters, loans from Chinese banks, reports that his PhD dissertation was improperly.
In just a minute. Yes.
Yeah, was improperly cited or plagiarism and stuff. 6 months ago, I could see conservatives around the boardroom going, all right, Trudeau's pretty good chance he's going to step down. Pretty good chance we're not running against Justin Trudeau. Who's the likely successor? Realistically, it was going to be Freeland or Carney. So you come up with your oppo and attack strategies on both.
Yeah, and then do your due diligence as running a political, maybe figuring out what was going to hit and do that with enough time so that you could actually plan your media and your ad spends appropriately.
There were
well in advance.
They missed a few steps, yeah. But I think in the context of 6 months ago, maybe the assumption was if Carney comes in, it's a change election. Trudeau's unpopular, but look at me. I'm the big new shiny thing. And then you start scraping some of the shine off. And I could see that working. What I cannot see working is, your top 3 stories of a day being like auto sector destroyed, French extending nuclear umbrella over Europe, Mark Carney alleged to have plagiarized PhD thesis.
In 1995.
It's so discordant with everything else.
Yeah.
And the problem, again, is that I don't know how this is landing in Alberta. I honestly don't. But I can tell you in Ontario, the auto sector, like, we're as sensitive to that as you guys are to the oil patch.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is, I'm going to quote former U.S. President Joe Biden. It's a big fucking deal. And a PhD thesis? And it's not just that it doesn't have the desired effect. It's certainly that. but it's not just that. It looks small.
It's petty.
Yeah.
It makes the attacker seem petty
It
compared
does
to
as
the
much or
person
more
he's
damage
attacking.
to the attacker.
Unless you have an actual kill shot here.
You want to, yeah, and I was thinking about that. If you're the Conservatives, you either need to find or hope someone else finds something that is significantly problematic, even on the scale of everything else the world is currently going through, and is particularly offensive to the left. Conservatives are voting conservative, right? A lot of, I think, former Liberal voters are probably this time at least open to voting for the Conservatives. The electoral math problem the Conservatives have now isn't that they're losing their own vote. If you actually look at all the recent polls this week, including the ones that do show the Liberals opening up big leads, the Conservatives are actually higher than their baseline. They're still up in the mid to high 30s. What's happened is that the NDP vote has collapsed, and that's gone to the Liberals. So the Conservatives can either need to create or hope for somebody that brings those votes back to the NDP.
Then maybe the Brookfield stuff is more effective than I think it is, and they're just chipping away at him because he's going to be the big evil capitalist banker, I guess.
I think that's the strategy. I think that's what they're trying to do. But
it's not. It just, like I said, it just seems like it makes you guys seem like you don't understand how the basics of international finance work and the reality of that, what that role and the role that he took entails. Like it makes them seem really naive about business, which is a weird look for a conservative party.
I'm going to say something that is going to be, it's going to be a loaded statement, but I actually mean it very sincerely.
Right.
Different people are going to take this different ways, but NDP voters aren't stupid. And NDP voters might take that as an insult, and non-NDP voters may disagree with me. But I think, even at the target audience here, people who are traditionally NDP voters or at least open to voting for the NDP, 6 months ago, Brookfield stuff, Bermuda, that might have bothered them. Right now,
it looks petty.
And they can go, yeah, you know what? I don't like this guy. I don't like him. I don't like big bankers with, huge ties to old school money, wealth, and capital. Like those are the kind of guys who pictures of Carney with the king have the opposite of the intended effect. But they're looking south and they're going, yeah, on the other hand, though.
Yeah, what are your alternatives? You like that?
Yeah, and I just think it's interesting for the Conservatives because a friend of mine who is a conservative had a really interesting observation to me this week, where he said the campaign for the Conservatives is actually going great. And I know people are going to go, what? No, like they're losing. That's not what he meant, though. He meant the Conservative Party of Canada as a political institution is putting on a very high caliber, professional political campaign. The logistics are good. The ground game is good. They've got the volunteers. They've got the databases. They've got the ads. Like all of the things.
I mean, they just fucked up the ballot question. Other than that, It's been brilliant.
And I know that Jen's sounds like Jen's being sarcastic. Maybe she is being sarcastic, but I think that is also a statement of God's own truth. This is probably, so far at least, the best campaign the Conservatives have run in a decade.
Yeah. There's
no
nothing
bozo eruptions.
There's nothing like being able to announce a $5,000 TFSA top up just on the exact same day that Donald Trump announces that he's going to collapse your auto industry. That meets the moment. Like I don't want to give the Conservatives too much hell here because I recognize that they are attempting to pivot, and what they're doing isn't bad. It's just laughably inadequate.
It's out of step.
It's not.
Have you ever seen the Instagram videos of like someone playing a famous song, but they alter it so that the drums are like one beat out of sequence?
Yeah.
It completely it's a tiny little tweak, but it completely ruins the song. Mm-hmm. The Conservatives, they're running a campaign that is an effective modern political operation, and they're doing it seamlessly. And the message is wrong.
You weren't compelled by the TFSA top up? What about the plan?
Personally, I kind of like it.
What about the promise not to change the OASH?
Well, that one actually pisses me off.
Oh yeah, that pisses me off too. What about that one? Can you name any other policy that they've announced since the campaign started?
You know what? I'm going to answer your question in a minute, but I want to sneak in something before we do, because
Okay.
you know what? You asking me if do I remember any other policies? Let's save that just for a moment. I do want to talk conservatives. Can I sneak in one other point first?
Go for it. And
Who
then,
have you
by the
not?
way, I'm going to go on a rant about the PhD thesis thing. So, like, I'm going to go on a tear. So stand by for that one.
Okay, like you take some deep breaths and oxygenate your blood. Who have you not heard from at all this campaign?
Jagmeet Singh.
Correct. NDP friends, you've already had me backhand you once without meaning to. I meant it with love. I'm being completely honest. I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's doing. I have not heard a single NDP announcement. If there's an NDP campaign happening out there, it's not breaking through.
They're very hopeful. I've heard that they're very hopeful. That Jack Layton, I think that Jack Layton thing, the Jack Layton wave, the orange wave, has broken an entire generation of NDP operatives.
In that it has made it impossible for them to realize a bad situation is bad instead of being potentially the start of something wonderful.
Yeah, that thing.
Look, I think regular line podcast.
They keep on waiting for some miracle to save them. No one's saving you.
Regular line podcast listeners will probably have a pretty good guess which way Jen and I have traditionally voted.
I don't
But
vote. No, I vote. I spoil my ballot.
Yeah, I'm increasingly heading that way too.
No, I always do it as a matter of like psychological
Purity.
Yeah, I do it to be like, no, you are not on anybody's team. You may have a perspective on the world that aligns with certain people. That's fine, but you don't belong to anybody's team. You are not a team player.
My attitude has always been I will give you my vote if you earn it, but it's been a long time since I voted for anyone, and I'm getting to the point where I don't even show up anymore. But I think I'm just trying to say this as a neutral political observer. I'm reading the coverage. I'm watching the news. I'm monitoring social media. I'm as plugged into this election as I am any other election, which is why I haven't slept in 6 days. There's not enough hours in the day to do all the things I need to be doing during an election. I don't know where Jagmeet Singh is, and I don't know what he's doing.
Can I go on a tear about the next Oppo drop? This is the one that came out today, the National Post exclusive about Mark Carney's supposed plagiarism.
Who am I to stand in your way?
Look, I think this is ridiculous. I think it's an incredibly weak attack. And when I've made the point about why, I've got a lot of, but what about Claudine Gay? And I'm going to go on a little rant here because one, there's a difference of both.
Should I leave the room? Like, should I go get a coffee or something?
This might be the moment to pee. Look, I mean, there's a difference here in both kind and type here. The first fundamental difference is what the Post found was weak sauce. Mark Carney wasn't representing a porter, by the way, who my husband, who's an economist trained, tells me is probably one of the most widely cited economist writers in recent generations. So Mark Carney wasn't taking Porter's ideas and then presenting them as his own. Mark Carney cited Porter, I think, 58 times in his doctoral thesis. The stuff that they're pointing out here is that they ran his doctoral thesis through Turnitin.com and found a handful of examples where sentences were kind of similar to Porter's book in examples where Carney cited Porter multiple times. And when we say when we the paraphrasing perhaps could have been slightly more on highly jargony technical sentences. When you're talking about economics or any kind of highly technical thing like that, you can only rephrase a concept however many times, right? And you can sort of nitpick about whether or not this ought to be in quotes or that ought to be in quotes, but we're right down in the weeds and nitpicking here. There is a fundamental difference between that kind of quote unquote plagiarism, where maybe he should have put this in quotes to describe a sentence that's kind of similar that was written by an incredibly well-known author who was already cited 58 times in this work. And by the way, Carney's own supervisor from Oxford looked at the examples and said on the record, this isn't plagiarism. Okay, so there's that. And what does that tell you? That he was a bit sloppy in maybe some of his citation in 1995 in his doctoral essay. Okay, fair enough.
Well,
That's
cancel the election.
That's substantively different than what Claudine Gay was accused of.
Sorry, Claudine Gay was the Harvard president, right?
Claudine Gay was a Harvard president who was in the midst of all of the drama about remember the Palestinian protests and not
When they
protecting
occupied
Jews
some of the buildings, yeah.
They occupied some of the buildings and all the rest. So in the midst of all of this, it came out that she had plagiarized aspects of her academic career.
That's an oppo drop.
There was a long history of it.
Yeah.
The examples of plagiarism were quite legitimate. There were substantive sections that were lifted, and also it went beyond sloppy citation and arguably went into the realm of like she took ideas that were not her own and presented them as her own. That is plagiarism. This wasn't a matter of like an and should have been in a sentence or there. These were substantive acts of plagiarism. And then we get into the difference of type. Mark Carney is not trying to like become the Prime Minister of Canada on the back of his academic credentials. All right? He's not... Claudine Gay was the head of the president of Harvard. For the president of Harvard to have, material plagiarism throughout her academic career of a kind that she would have expelled a student for, that's legitimate hypocrisy. That's a legitimate problem. For Mark Carney to have had some sloppy citations in 1995, left academia, gone on to like work at Goldman Sachs, become a governor of the bank of several national countries, and basically build a pretty phenomenal career for himself by any measure. We're evaluating his capacity to function as a prime minister on that like 40-year resume and that life experience. A sloppy citation in an essay in 1995 is not disqualifying. The difference of plagiarism between Gay and Carney is substantive. Okay, we're talking about fundamentally different allegations. And also, it doesn't matter in Carney's case because he already has a demonstrated track record of being able to function in the real world outside of an academic environment. We're not evaluating him for an academic position right now. We're evaluating him for a real-world position based on his real-world credentials and his real-world experience. I don't actually care if he was a doctor or not. It's not relevant. It's not relevant. So, I understand the oppo drop. I understand what the Conservatives are trying to do with this oppo drop. They're trying to replicate the Claudine Gay scandal. And it's pathetic. It's weak. There's no here.
Am I going to get in trouble for making a pun based on the names of the people involved?
Go for it.
I was just thinking, don't be gay.
but look, if I were
someone's going to clip that and use it against me, so I want the full sentence clipped. But yeah, no, this is not a gay. They're trying to make gay happen, and it's not. This is not a Harvard situation. You've had a full rant here. Can I get psychological for 2 minutes?
But can I also just say, if my undergrad, I've had my undergraduate essays submitted to turn it in. There's always a couple little lines that come back as tweak, and then the professor is usually sort of be like, oh, okay, well, I understand how you got sloppy a little bit here, fix that here, or whatever. But never enough that's never been enough to get you a failing grade. That mistakes can happen it's not the same thing, guys. It's not the same thing.
I never got turn it in, but my essays were always more editorials than they were research papers.
Yeah, this was actually the critique I always got as well. It was this doesn't read like a research paper. This reads like an essay. That was always good. But I mean, there's always going to be the odd, these 3 or 4 words are kind of similar to those 3 or 4 words. And most professors will look at that stuff through Turn It In. They'll use Turn It In as a tool to help them evaluate some of this stuff. But it's if 1 or 2 sentences is kind of similar to 1 or 2 other sentences, that's usually not in and of itself enough to get an essay failed at an undergraduate level, much less a doctoral thesis that actually passed a committee, a thesis committee at Oxford. I'm pretty sure they could evaluate if Mark Carney was a plagiarist.
I'm going to get psychological here. But first, just for people wondering what Jen and I keep referring to, Turnitin is a website that when Jen and I were in university, and presumably since there'd be some version of this,
Yes.
a part of submitting an essay, a regular part of submitting an essay is that you'd print it off and you'd staple it and you'd put it into a binder and you'd hand it to the professor and put it on his desk at the front of the class. But you were also required to submit to turnitin.com an electronic version of that essay, and there would be like a code to use for your class or something, and then the professor would then get like an automated Gurney's essay is not plagiarized, Gerson's essay is not plagiarized, et cetera, et cetera. Carney's apparently is or isn't, whatever. So that's what we're referring to here, and it looks like someone is putting Carney's old academic work into the plagiarism checking systems. So that's also, the Turnitin reference.
The other thing I'd point out is like even in Turnitin, it was rarely like a yes stamp, no not stamp. What Turnitin would do is they would run the actual words against their database to find instances where sentences were similar to other work. And then
also
the professor,
other students submitting work.
And other students as well. So this would allow the professors to evaluate whether or not the student, it was a tool to help them to evaluate whether or not a student was lifting stuff that wasn't their work. But even Turnitin in and of itself wasn't like the final word. A professor's discretion is also required to try and figure out whether or not a student was using something inappropriately. Like,
well, sometimes it was the final word because some kids I knew got caught.
Well, but they probably caught rightly, right? Like
it was 100%. So someone else submitted this exact same paper to me 3 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like 75% of the words are exactly the same. Like, but Turnitin will also catch like the odd half a sentence that's similar to the way someone else structured something or tried to convey an idea. So stuff that might be very, very, very superficially similar. And you're especially going to run into problems like that when you're talking about really obscure concepts. So for example, the sentence that got flagged here, and I'm going to pull this right from the Post's story, is the following. Something to the effect of, I'm going to pull it down here. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm going to find the actual paragraph here. It was in his 1995 thesis, The Dynamic Advantage of Competition. Here, I'm going to pull it out. Okay, so this is from his own official fellow of economics at Nutfield College in a provided statement said, I believe you are mischaracterizing this work. As an academic of nearly 40 years, I see no evidence of plagiarism in this thesis you cited, nor any unusual academic practices. Mark's thesis was evaluated and approved by a faculty committee that saw his work for what it was, an impressive and thoroughly researched analysis that set him apart from his peers. Okay, fine. Oh God, where's the actual quote? I actually had it in our bullshit bulletin here. I don't want to let you get philosophical without actually repeating the actual thing here.
Psychological.
Oh, fine.
Here, let me pull up the bullshit bulletin. Which, by the way, everybody, our bullshit bulletin's back. Go check that out.
Here it is. Carney wrote, first, government intervention can impede international competition and artificially support domestic profits. Later he adds, second, in an industry or an economy where many firms are following harvesting strategies, firms may maintain the profitability even though they are losing competitiveness. And according to the Post, these are virtually the exact sentences that can be found in Porter's book on page 797, except Carney added an extra determinant and the adverb even. He did not use quotation marks or add a footnote in reference to Porter's work anywhere in the entire paragraph. Yeah, he did cite Porter 58 other times in his essay, though, and also those are the kinds of sentences where when you're dealing with highly technical phrases, it's hard to paraphrase that or rephrase that all the time over and over again. Like, was he maybe a bit sloppy with his citation in 1995?
Yes.
Sure.
We must therefore disqualify him from public
for
office.
Prime Minister. I guess everything he did in the 30-odd years since doesn't count then. Prime Minister over.
Well, this is where I want to get psychological. So,
okay, all right, sorry.
Jen had her rant.
I had my rant. I'm stopping.
She's doing much better now, everybody. She's on the path to recovery.
Oh, you made me log back into Twitter. This is on you.
I also told you to log out. I needed you to go in and change 2 settings. Okay, here we go. This will only take a couple of minutes, and this is going to be a deeper jump into the Matt psyche than Line Podcast listeners are used to. You want to know what my anxiety dream is? A lot of people have like standard anxiety dreams where it's giving a speech and they're naked or they can't find something that they really need to find. Mine has always been getting called in to work by my boss, which I currently don't have. So the dreams are becoming increasingly implausible. But, and it's basically being told, hey, Matt, apparently you should have taken like a grade 11 calculus class and you never did. So technically you never graduated high school. And I have these dreams of being like a guy in an early 40s, a national columnist and, entrepreneur leading a independent media site, having to show up at Langstaff Secondary School in Richmond Hill, Ontario for one semester to complete grade 11 calculus. And one of the things that I've actually found, maybe it's a sign of growing maturity and self-confidence, is just that when I've had this dream in recent years, first of all, I have it less often than I used to have it, but also in my dream, I'm getting indignant. I'm like, who the fuck are we kidding here? No, I'm not going back to high school. It's ridiculous. What is being alleged about Carney here made me think of that dream. Like Carney woke up today and it was real, and he's being told, Prime Minister, I hate to say this, but apparently you got to go back to Oxford and you got to do revisions.
About to get revoked.
Yeah, the review committee.
You should have said, if only you had said, secondly, an economy industry where firms are following harvesting strategies can maintain some degree of EBITDA profitability in the face of declining competitiveness. If only you had said it that way, you'd be solid.
So you're going to have to give back the Order of Canada. You're retroactively going to have to give back your salary for all of the stuff you've done.
Yep.
Chrystia Freeland is being immediately declared retroactively the winner of the Liberal leadership race. She's the Prime Minister now. No, it's like Mark Carney is having a real life version of my imposter syndrome dream where it's like, no, Matt, you didn't get that credit you needed in grade 11. So it's like... the one thing I do consider to be encouraging about my mental health is that in my more recent versions of this dream, I'm like, this is fucking stupid. I'm not doing it. I'm not going back to high school, and you can't make me. I'm a 42-year-old man. And I fully think that Mark Carney has the right this morning to tell the National Post that he is not going back to grade school, that he's the Liberal leader, he is the caretaker Prime Minister of Canada. He is a former highly successful banking and investment manager. He has been the governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and he does not need the credit for grade 11 calculus. And they can get bent if they insist otherwise. I'm probably, as we said before, I'm probably not voting for Mark Carney, but on this one, I would have his back.
I don't know. This whole episode is so pathetic and so small that it's kind of making me rethink the whole Claudine Gay situation.
Jen means the Carney thing, not this episode of the Line Podcast, which is excellent. And you should like and share it. Before we move on, let's take 2 or 3 minutes, because we've danced around this without actually fully engaging with it. Let's talk about the Conservative campaign this week.
Sure.
There was, I find it really, really interesting. To my Conservative friends, don't get pissed off. I'm not trying to give you mealy-mouthed compliments here. I've had the sense, and I'll be as vague as this, Jen, you'll understand what I'm saying. I've had the sense in recent weeks that there has been a growing sense inside the Conservative Party, particularly inside the office of the Leader of the Opposition, that there needed to be a big shift. As you and I were saying before, the campaign was ready to go. It was a dialed-in campaign that was off message. And I think most people around Pierre Poilievre have understood that. I think 1 or 2 critical people did not. And unfortunately for them, they were the ones who had the final say. I do think this week, I don't know what it was exactly, that sanity has begun to prevail, or reality has begun to sink in, whatever you want to call it. There was, I think we talked about this a little bit in the podcast last week. I was counting tweets, which is always a sign that things are going well. But I was looking at tweets Poilievre's official account had been putting out, and the language was changing slightly. It was very similar to what it had been, but then they were adding things like to stand up to America. Thursday at a rally, Pierre Poilievre gave the strongest comments he has yet given to date that were specifically targeted at the actions coming out of the White House. Okay, so to my conservative friends, you are all getting gold star stickers. Okay, I'm not going back to high school. I am sending you guys back to elementary school. You are getting stickers. You can come up to my desk. You can pick which one you want. Here is the helpful feedback part of my observation. If you haven't seen the video, Jen, you should. Pierre Poilievre is saying almost exactly what you and I have been demanding he should be saying for months. And oh my God, is he ever palpably uncomfortable saying it. Pierre Poilievre is a guy who is known. I'm not saying this to like fluff his resume here. What is the one thing that almost everybody would agree is Pierre Poilievre's political strength going back almost his entire career? Performances in the House. The guy gets up in the House and he will tear into people. He will deliver with flawless verbal precision. Just absolute broadsides into anyone or anything. Yesterday, he said everything I think he should have been saying about Donald Trump since at least January. And he sounded uncertain, like he had never read it before. Maybe after 2 or 3 rallies, if they stick with the message, he's going to get it down. Maybe it is a muscle memory thing. Maybe he's a guy who needs to read a speech 1,000 times into the mirror before he's comfortable with it. But you know what the less charitable explanation is? He doesn't believe it, and he's uncomfortable saying it.
Okay, so can I renege on all of the previous advice that we've given to the Conservative Party?
No. No, permission denied.
Okay, but hear me out. play with this idea. Pierre Poilievre. Okay, I might change my mind on all of this. Okay, Pierre Poilievre should absolutely run a campaign that feels authentic to himself. Okay, and I don't think that he should necessarily parrot our line or necessarily parrot what the focus group or the polling data tells him. I think that he should run a campaign that's authentic to himself and be willing to accept that he just might not be the guy people are looking for right now. And maybe that's the right answer for him. Maybe the best answer is that when the ballot question is who's best equipped to deal with Donald Trump, he accepts that answer is not him, and as such accepts the disqualification that implies about him and his leadership. Run the campaign that feels authentic to him. He should be himself.
Tactically and politically, that is 100% the wrong thing to say.
But morally, it
might be the right thing. But how? That's
kind of my point. Like, if you can only answer that question, the question here, who's best equipped to be Donald Trump? If I'm Pierre Poilievre and I can only answer that question by lying to people about who I am and what I believe, then I shouldn't be prime minister. At least not now. At least not in this moment.
The reason I think I disagree with what you're saying is because I actually think there is a version of Pierre Poilievre's message that only with very slight adjustments does meet the moment. And I don't want to sound like I'm...
The reason why these guys can't pivot is because they fundamentally disagree that they should.
Their heart's not in it.
Their heart's not in it.
But
that provides a real clear, stark choice for Canadians when they vote. If you think they're right and that Trump is not the big deal and we need to be focusing on TFSA top-ups and, tweaks to build homes.
Industrial carbon
and
tax.
axing the industrial carbon tax, and that's where you want our focus to be, then these are the guys for you. And if you think that is insane, petty anti-nonsense in the face of a radically changing global order, then these aren't the guys for you. And that's just that. Maybe it's just that simple.
See, I think you're wrong.
If these guys can't pivot if these guys can't pivot because they genuinely don't think that this should be the ballot question, well, guess what, guys? You don't actually control the ballot question. The voters do.
But I don't think, Jen, that's why they can't pivot. I honestly think if you look at the totality of what Pierre Poilievre has been saying for the last 3 years, and I'm telling people, I'm going to do, especially people who are not intending to vote for Pierre Poilievre, I'm going to ask them to do something difficult here, which is to give him a pass for tone. Look at the core messages he's had. If we had been doing those things, we would be better off today to face the United States. I think that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have correctly identified the fundamental failures of 10 years of Justin Trudeau.
It's why Carney's been very successful stealing their campaign from right out, or stealing their playbook and their policies right out from under them and running on them because they're right. They've been right.
There should be a way, and I'm not trying to say this in a naive or preachy way. I'm just saying politically, strategically, tactically, there should be a way for the Conservatives to lean into everything coming out of the United States and to go, this is what we have been warning you about, and no one will throw themselves to this task with more vigor than us because we're finally getting the chance to make this country as strong as we've been telling you it needs and should be.
Yeah,
that ought to be a really easy Conservative campaign. And again, look, in a week from now, we'll be recording a new episode.
Yeah,
we'll be able.
The polls will have radically changed, and we'll
no, you know what? I don't think they will. But I will. But we will in 1 week. We'll be able to determine two questions. One, did the message Pierre Poilievre gave yesterday mark a meaningful pivot in the campaign? Not more of the box checking he's been trying to get away with. What do you want? I tweeted about Trump. Now we're back to talking about the tax. If Pierre Poilievre makes the message he delivered haltingly and awkwardly yesterday the center of his campaign through every social media channel, every conventional ad buy, every proxy, and every surrogate, in a week we'll be able to say, oh, okay, they mean it. And then if they don't, well, that answers that. But if they mean it, and if they make that pivot, we will then know if he's gotten any more comfortable saying it.
But I don't know. But that gets us to the deeper moral question. Like, if he has to perform in order to meet the moment, then he has to come to terms with the fact that he's not the guy for the moment. And maybe he just isn't. Like maybe there's nowhere else to go there. In which case, don't listen to Matt and I. Be authentically you and allow people to make the decision about whether or not that's good enough. And be willing to accept that the answer might be it's not.
Listen to us to the extent necessary that I can point to things that you have said as proof that we are listened to in high official circles and then sell that to advertisers. To that extent, yes, listen to us. The rest is up to you.
Yeah, well, we're not running a campaign, man. We're just
running a business.
We're just running a business. I don't know what to tell you. That's fine. Anyway, on that note, like and subscribe. And when we come back, we're gonna talk about juicy shit. We're gonna talk about the simmering conservative civil war. It's back.
Yay!
The war never ended. It'll never end. And in the meantime, like and subscribe. www.readtheline.ca.
This message is brought to you by Environmental 360 Solutions. Ontario's recycling system is failing local businesses and benefiting large American recyclers. Over $10 million a year is being collected from Ontario consumers in mandatory fees for tire and battery recycling, but much of the work is being outsourced to American recyclers. This is starving local Ontario companies of opportunities to do that work and keep good jobs in the province. Worse, enough mandatory fees have been collected from the consumers to recycle 100% of the materials, but only a fraction of this work is actually being done. Ontario's recycling regulator is finally taking action, issuing penalties to the companies collecting the recycling fees. But in turn, these companies are using these mandatory fees paid by Ontarians to fund recycling programs to cover the fines. The result, Ontario consumers are enriching unscrupulous industry participants and American recyclers, undermining recycling, job creation, and investment in Ontario. It's time for real accountability in the recycling industry. To learn more, go to e360s.ca/fairer recycling. Jen, you and I alternate on provincial updates from the home front. The line is building out a roster of contributors in other provinces, something we're still working on, something I would have been working on more if my fucking April hadn't been blown up by this election. But I want to give you an update from Ontario.
Okay, but do we want to talk about what's our update from Ontario?
It's the one that's relevant to what you think we're going to be talking about now.
Okay, because I think I almost want to have this conversation, start this conversation by revealing a secret.
Ooh, well then, by all means.
That is, it's not much of a secret if you're actually involved in conservative politics, but if you are not sort of a nerd like us, if you are maybe one of the listeners who's not a total Canadian politics nerd, you may not be aware of the fact that there are factions within the Conservative Party, and that some of these factions hate each other.
It's
with the passion of 1,000 fiery suns.
The third time in 2 weeks we've said that infidels have it better than heretics.
Yes,
internal civil wars are usually nastier than state-on-state wars.
Yes, and on that note, I think we need to talk about some long-standing hatred. Long-standing hatred.
All right, so there has been, for years, the Conservative Party of Canada might be too big a tent. Might be, honestly, the best way to put it. It might be fundamentally too big a tent. And in recent years, you saw Stephen Harper brings together all the tribes of Canadian conservatism into a Conservative Party of Canada, wins 3 elections, each one better, and then loses. And then since then, they've been trying to figure out what to do. And there are factions within Canadian conservatism that I think we saw most famously play out during the leadership race and then leadership tenure of Aaron O'Toole. The guy was balanced right on the edge of all these factions, and a lot of people were criticizing him. I don't think we're telling tales out of school here when we note that one of the widest criticisms of Aaron O'Toole was he went from sort of affable Toronto area conservative to rock rib true blue conservative and back in about 12 months. And I don't know, look, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if anyone could have done that elegantly. I know that he did not totally succeed in what he was trying to do.
No.
After he was purged in 2022.
On the argument that conservatives don't need to pretend to be many liberals in order to win the election, they can be true blue conservatives. Look at us go. The
true blue wing of conservatism, as led by and frankly embodied by Pierre Poilievre, became ascendant and then began a gradual process of opening up at times a 25-point lead over the Justin Trudeau Liberals, which a great many people inside Canadian conservatism, and I think a lot of true bluers, but a lot of others as well, who are kind of going, holy shit, maybe they were right all along. Maybe these guys were right.
Including us, by the way. Like, I believe that both of us did our penance rounds where we were just like, we didn't think that the true blue conservatives could carry a significant majority, electoral majority.
Or a large minority, yeah.
Or a large minority, and we think that you guys are relegating yourselves to the fringes. When we were wrong about that. We were clearly wrong.
Or?
Sort of.
Or maybe not, because
or
here we are.
Maybe not. Maybe we were just ahead of the curve on that.
We're going to have to go do another penance tour to apologize for our previous penance tour.
We take it back.
What happened in Ontario this week was that Corey Tenike, who is senior advisor and very much of the Ontario conservative movement, right-hand man.
And not really the true blue conservative.
Right-hand man to Doug Ford, right?
Yeah. So this is how would you position him against Aaron O'Toole? Is he? I don't think they're part of the same faction, but I think they're definitely both part of the same squishy.
Yeah,
squishy conservative.
They would orbit the same sun.
Okay.
At an event in downtown Toronto, Corey revealed that internal Ontario PC party polling, not federal conservative, Ontario progressive conservative polling, has the federal conservatives in complete collapse in Ontario. Now, I want to put a caveat around this. None of the other polls show this yet. I'm not rejecting what Corey brought out. Could be. Campaign Research is the company. They're credible. they could be ahead of the curve and showing something that's real. I don't know. What I do know is that it almost doesn't matter. The fascinating thing was seeing Corey tonight go out there and reveal that poll in a on-the-record public gathering at the Empire Club or the National Club.
Yeah, it was an Empire Club.
I don't remember which one it was.
And this was recorded. This can actually be listened to in their Empire.
I've
in
listened
the
to it.
Empire Club podcast. Yes, so bye.
And Corey had folksy comparisons saying that what Polyev, kind of you and I in the second segment were talking about how the messaging is off. They've missed the moment. Corey's way of describing it is that you've asked the whole family what they want for dinner. Everybody wants Italian, and you get them in the car and you drive them to the Mandarin, which is a Chinese buffet. Do you guys have Mandarins out west?
No, I don't. But I've been to Mandarin.
Okay.
I understand the glory of
So
Mandarin.
yeah, it's basically everybody wants Italian. You take them to the Chinese buffet. And Corey says this is why Polyev is just plummeting in Ontario. It's a folksy way of putting it. I think it's fundamentally accurate. This is what you and I were talking about in the last segment about just being off message. Very effective campaign machine pumping the wrong message. The really interesting thing, though, isn't what Corey said. It's not the numbers. It's not the quips. It's the fact that Corey tonight just shoved a knife into Pierre Poilievre in front of 15 million Ontarians. And I think
on the first day of an election campaign.
That's it, right? Like there are two very obvious conclusions I draw from this. The first is that this background civil war and conservatism is increasingly not in the background.
Yeah, it's now very much in the public.
The second is that Doug Ford has written off Pierre Poilievre and doesn't see any harm in burning those bridges because he's concluded he won't be prime minister in 5 weeks.
Also tells you that Doug Ford is taking the lead on replacing Pierre Poilievre.
I was going to mention that, but yeah. So Doug Ford is not loved by the whole spectrum of Canadian conservatism because he's seen as being a liberal. Frankly, I don't disagree with that. If you were to ask,
but you know what Doug Ford has that Pierre Poilievre doesn't?
3 consecutive majority victories.
That one, that thing. We're gonna have fucking Prime Minister Doug Ford, aren't we?
I don't know.
Jesus Christ.
I said this in our first dispatch when we, our first written dispatch when the campaign was called last weekend. I wrote, and I stand by this. We have 4 quadrants of possibilities here. Liberal majority, liberal minority, conservative majority, conservative minority. Those are all in play as live options. I would say 2 of them lead pretty quickly to the possibility of Doug Ford replacing Pierre Poilievre, yeah.
Yeah, and not only that, but I think that if the Conservative Party managed to blow a sustained 20-point lead in an election on an absolutely historic 3-month timescale, which is something nobody's ever seen before. We have never seen anyone fuck that up.
Did we talk about this last week? Normally, yeah, I think I did. I made the Al Qaeda joke. These polling charts suggest like a disqualifying event. That's
yes.
You know, you're banging the intern, or you got drunk driving home from a campaign rally and ran over a nanny or something. That's what Poilievre's poll numbers look like.
Yes, but what they don't understand is the degree to which their messaging, their polling, and their reluctance to recognize the ballot question in the moment is disqualifying. It is actively disqualifying. So disqualifying event is correct. But what I would say is if these guys manage to set expectations stonking majority to complete and total collapse, like if this is a liberal majority, not only is that faction going to be run out of the party, they will be run out of the party with pitchforks and fire because these guys have pissed off huge factions within the party. Like Pierre Poilievre absolutely did manage to unify the party for a time when he was winning, but in the face of that, he's also pissed off a lot of his caucus. He's pissed off a lot of people who were sort of different ideological or different factional sides of the Conservative Party. He's really gained no allies. like, I don't know, maybe running against all the media was not the brightest move in the entire. I don't know. Anyway, look, these guys have behaved in a way that has actively alienated entire subsections of the conservative movement. And if they can't pull it out and win, or at the very least
There'll be
keep the
no
conservative
mercy.
keep the liberals to a minority, there will be no mercy for them.
That's
They will be run out of conservative politics, and I don't see a path back for these people if they lose this that badly.
it. I actually think in different terms. I think the Conservative Party of Canada breaks up.
It might, and it might break up in three pieces, not two.
Four,
Because I
actually.
think that increasingly
There
the
could be
Western
a Western
conservative,
conservative, an Ontario conservative, a Quebec conservative, and a Maritime conservative or Atlantic conservative.
yeah, because I just increasingly think these groups have very little in common anymore.
And it could work,
Like
by the way. That could actually be
it
a
could,
very
it could,
effective way
you
of
could,
getting
you
conservative
could,
governance in Ottawa.
you could get a coalition going on
Mm-hmm.
that. But like, I mean, the other factional divide that's now starting to become very public is the Danielle Smith, Alberta, Western conservative,
Yeah.
pro-America wing. That's a whole other conversation. We got a column coming on that one next week, let me tell you. But that I think is would be one other faction of that federal conservative party that I think increasingly has no real resemblance or love for the wing that Pierre represents, which is more true blue but not Trumpy necessarily, although they do kind of play with some of the conspiracism a little bit. I was going to have a whole rant about conspiracy theories, but that's a whole other conversation. And then you've got like the Aaron O'Toole sort of Doug Ford faction, which is going to be a totally different thing. So like, if Pierre can't hold this together with a credible result here, and I think keeping the Liberals to a minority at a minimum would be the credible result. Like at a minimum, this party is not gonna be kind about it. Like the stuff that's coming out publicly now at the first week of the campaign is vicious. The stuff that is circulating privately right now is vicious. These people hate each other. They hate each other as much or more that they hate the
Oh,
Liberals.
no. It's
Much
much
more.
more.
Much more.
It's not a
And it's
contest.
personal. Like it's personal with the conservatives. Like with the Liberals, like a lot of the conservatives hate the Trudeau in an abstract, like that fucking guy way.
Yeah, they waved the fuck Trudeau flag, but yeah,
They wave the fuck Trudeau flag, but like they would punch each other on the street if they met to some of these fellow conservative factions. So like this gets real messy on the conservative side.
There was a story.
Really, really
Did the story about Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre having a phone call go national, or was that an Ontario story?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that went national.
So for people who might have missed that, that was just a couple of weeks ago. Poilievre called Doug and basically asked for advice and input. And now both camps have spun this different ways, but basically they had a conversation, and the crux of it was Doug declined to offer assistance to the federal campaign. Now, as Jen has already alluded, there's a pretty high likelihood that Doug Ford could be, assuming there is still a Conservative Party of Canada, there's a likelihood that it could be him who leads it next. But Jen's not wrong. The way the knives are coming out, and Jen, let me actually, like, this is going to get a little meta here.
But then you also get people who are criticizing Tory for being like, guys, it's the middle of a campaign.
Ford?
Like,
Oh, Corey,
no,
yeah,
Tory tonight or Taniaki.
tonight, but it's Corey, not Tory.
Tonight. All right, that's what I said. I said
I think
Corey.
you said
Anyway,
Tory, but whatever.
look, I'm sorry, Corey. Come on the line. I've already sent you a note. If you hear me out there, come on the line and come talk with us. But there have been people who have criticized him as well and said,
Wow.
you shouldn't be doing this in the middle of an election campaign.
Well, here's
what are you
the
doing,
thing.
buddy?
So, the voice of Ontario speaking. The Ford guys get out over their skis on a semi-regular basis too. So,
Sure.
like right now, I know what Corey is doing. It's possible it blows up in his face at some point, because you never know who's going to win a civil war. Unexpected things happen in civil wars, and if Canadian conservatism is about to fragment again, you never know where that's going to go. But I want to make a meta comment here where I'm going to talk about the Line podcast as if I'm not currently in the middle of co-hosting it. Directionally speaking, what does the fact that you and I are on March 28th talking about this tell you about the state of Canadian conservatism?
Meep,
So,
meep, meep. Meep, meep. It's from the Muppets. Meep.
imagine power of time travel, all right? You go back in time, you grab some of our Conservative Party of Canada friends, and you play them this segment of the podcast, and you tell them that we recorded that 5 days into the next federal election. They wouldn't believe you.
I wouldn't believe me.
You know what? I think you would have, because I think one thing you and I were relatively clear-eyed about always was that Poilievre was fragile. Even when I thought he was going to win 230 seats, if you had asked me to describe a scenario that completely inverts that, what I would have described would not have looked that different from what's happening. Poilievre is not a guy, if he comes up short, I still think it's cliches, right? Long campaigns matter. It's a lot that can happen. But if he loses this, the way he's going to lose it is not something that was unforeseen.
No,
Like,
it was not unforeseen. It was just
unlikely.
unacknowledged.
6 months ago, if I had said to you, write me a scenario for a Liberal majority government, you probably would have gone, okay, well, Trudeau steps down. There's an external event that sort of pumps some life back into the party. And the Conservatives can't track with it because they're inflexible.
Also, would have been the long-standing critiques that we have made of Pierre and the people around him, is that these guys were more fixated on winning a particular kind of an election, and it turns out a very particular kind of election, than in actually governing. I have yet to see any evidence that these guys have any cohesive vision or plan for how, like, they've got a very, very clear eye for what the problems are. I actually think they're correct. Like, I think they get what the issues are. They see what we see, all right? They've got the sight, all right?
Pierre Poilievre has correctly read the problems in Canada for years.
Yes.
And he has been ahead of the curve on calling them out, and that's why he did go way up in the polls.
100%. I give him full credit for that. But then when you ask them what's the policy response? You do get some good policy responses, as evidenced by the fact that the Liberals have stolen a lot of them. They're good ideas, but they're marginal. They're marginal ideas, right? Like, the big picture stuff never gets articulated, right? And that's just, it just makes me always concerned that these guys were always going to retreat back to a conservative version of the Trudeau Liberal era, which was highly symbolic action, highly symbolic action, lots of memery, pissing off the right people, the same kind of highly dualistic, you're the evil, we're the white hats, you're the black hats. They're just going to do it from the other direction. And in the process, we'll lose another 10 fucking years not making the necessary reforms to the civil service, to the way our economy works, to our industrial policy, and it's like you're coming out into this campaign environment, and even if you can't fully authentically pivot to being like the anti-Trump guy, okay, what are your policy goals? Like, at least salvage yourself with your team, right? Like, where's your team, man? Where's Lanceman? Where's like all of your MPs? Where are all the people who could be, taking some hits and doing some shots with you? Why is it the Pierre Poilievre show? Why does that give me not a lot of comfort? Right? Why are you turning it into a cult of personality in exactly the same way that Justin Trudeau did? Where's your team?
One of the things tonight talked about in those very blunt comments was that Pierre Poilievre is personally disliked.
Yeah, great. You're creating a cult of personality around a guy people don't like. I don't think that's a smart idea, guys. And also, like, okay, so your big policy announcement this week was a TFSA top-up. that maybe we're going to do some more boutique targeted tax cuts. Maybe we'll get special tax breaks on soccer balls.
You know what happened?
It's thin. It's small.
I'm going to go full meta here. I've gone partially meta. Let's go all the way meta. I've talked about this before. I've talked about this with you before, and I've talked about this with a bunch of the old Harper guys before, many of whom are now off in comms jobs or running consulting firms, making a mint, living their best lives.
Many of whom could have been tapped for like a transition team that could have been baller and haven't been.
One of the things Harper had going for him circa 2003, when they brought the Alliance and the PCs together, was that there was a lot that the factions of Canadian conservatism agreed on. Didn't agree on everything, disagreed about some stuff, but you had a pretty long, meaty list of ideas that had broad support across Western conservatives, Ontario conservatives, Quebec conservatives, and Maritime conservatives, Atlantic conservatives. You had enough to get through 10 years of governments, 2 minorities and then a majority, implementing those shared policies. But by the end of it, there wasn't that much left on the list. And now there were definitely things that the Conservative could have done, and there were definitely ideas within the Conservative Party, but they weren't totally broadly shared anymore. Everything Harper could have done if he had won again in 2015 would have meant trade-offs within the Conservative movement. And what the Conservative movement in Canada should have done was some process of intellectual and policy renewal. But Canada doesn't really have the infrastructure for that. We don't have a large number of think tanks, period, let alone explicitly conservative ones. We don't have, like in the United States, like you have entire city blocks in DC that are think tanks. There are ecosystems with with donors and money and researchers and polling firms that are generating papers all the time. Look at all the controversy over Project 2025 in the United States. I'm not here to endorse it. What I am going to say is there is no version of that in Canada.
We are very strongly not here to endorse that shit.
There would be no architecture in Canada to create such a thing. Even if it was good or even if it was fucking batshit crazy. There's no apparatus to generate
I think
that.
you're underestimating how brilliant that Pierre Poilievre is personally, and he'll just figure it out because he can govern an entire country out of his head. Look, something globalist WEF, Matt.
Build the homes.
Do you want to stop eating bugs?
No. I don't.
You look like the type of person who would love a bug.
I think I have eaten bugs that were dipped in chocolate.
Well, tells us everything we need to know about you, Mr. Mainstream Media.
Mm-hmm. Had bugs with my lattes.
There you go.
There is a really nice cafe down the street from me. It does really good lattes. I lean into that because they're yummy.
You own nothing, Matt. You'll own nothing.
And I'll like it. I'll be happy. Yeah, I know the cliches. You know what? Look, campaigns matter. Look, here's the thing. Carney gets up in front of a lectern and goes, "Hey, everybody, great to be here today," and Chicoutimi, and switches into French and accidentally declares his intention to firebomb an orphanage when he meant to say, "It's great to see everybody here today." Like, these things can matter. There could be oppo that happens. And also, it's possible that Pierre Poilievre makes a pivot, gets the party behind him, and the news cycle works his way. And they squeak through. And it's also possible. I'm mentioning this purely to put it on the record. Anecdotally, and I'm not talking partisans here, I'm talking reporters who are out there in the field, even just some friends of mine. The Conservatives are showing pockets of rally support where you wouldn't expect it. And I don't overreact to rallies. I don't. I really promise people I don't. But the data picture on how the Conservatives are doing right now is, I would say, not going to call it mixed. I am going to call it slightly confusing. Maybe, if the Conservatives make a pivot that defangs some of Carney's advantage on the Trump question. Doesn't even have to do better, but eats into his lead. If the campaign chips away at Carney's personal popularity, here's a fun one. Lucy in the football comparisons acknowledged. Maybe the younger voters who are pissed off about housing do show up this election for the Conservatives.
It'll happen one day.
There is a path here to Poilievre winning.
Oh, of course
It's just getting narrower.
Yeah.
So let's run through 4 scenarios here, and then we'll hit a like and subscribe.
Well, no, I mean let's also like start plotting our anti-penance tour.
National tour.
Start crafting that.
Yeah, national
crafting
tour.
that in my head. All right.
What happens to Poilievre in the following 4 scenarios? Liberal majority. Does he last a week? Does he quit the night of?
No, I think he quits the night of.
Liberal minority.
I think he's got a shot.
Conservative minority.
That gets real messy.
That does get messy. I actually think he's safer in a liberal minority.
Yeah, that's actually the messier scenario.
Conservative majority is obviously safe.
Yeah, then you're safe.
It's like I said when we're talking about Doug, there are 2 scenarios there that Doug steps in real quick.
Well, not only that, but how does a conservative minority generate support enough to last a confidence vote? I think he lasts 12 months tops, and then we're back at a poll. Maybe if he can throw significant bones to the block, maybe. But even in that scenario, you're pissing off Alberta by stages by doing that. So you're pissing off your Western conservative base, which maybe you can afford to piss off.
Imagine 150, 160 conservative seats. You know what? The smart play strategically would be, and this would definitely piss off Alberta. You partner with the Liberals. You do a national emergency government for a limited period of time, where you basically say, look, we've got 160 and the Liberals got 130.
Yep.
We're going to agree for 12 months on 5 key priorities. We're going to fund existing services at the current level, but we're not going to defund the CBC. We're not going to do any of that bullshit. We're going to do an emergency rearmaments program. We're going to immediately hammer interprovincial trade barriers. And Deputy Prime Minister Mark Carney is the guy who we're going to task with doing that.
Yeah. And
we're going to.
And that means when you go into the next election, you can't really paint him as the Trump guy.
And also, it's the old Harper quote, right? The longer I'm Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Of course, how does Alberta handle that? Pierre Poilievre.
I have my theories about how Alberta is going to go, but that's, again, I'm going to save that for the column.
So there are 2 scenarios under which Poilievre survives election night. There's 2 he probably doesn't. There's 1 he certainly doesn't. And
I think if it's a liberal majority, he's going to be hoisted upon his own petard, and he's going to be basically kicked out of the party if he doesn't end it himself rapidly.
Step out on the stage, say merci beaucoup, mes amis, and then just quit.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to be vicious and it's going to be personal. And also, like, his faction did it to O'Toole. You had an ample opportunity to prove that your point was correct, and you failed.
I have a feeling the people, not the true blue believers, the ones who were Poilievre all the way, they've made their choice. But the ones who signed up with Poilievre conditionally during the O'Toole purge, not merger, hard rain's going to fall. That's all I got.
All I got. Like and subscribe. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca.
Check out our bullshit bulletin. We're really excited with it. We fucking love the bullshit bulletin.
People love the bulletin.
Yeah.
People love it.
I was looking at we published it just this morning. The stats are already through the charts. It's something we know people who are not regular line readers read. And we can
it totally is. And that's because, you know what? We take shots at everyone.
Yeah.
We really do.
It's our natural operating environment.
It is our natural operating environment. We take no prisoners. We call out bullshit all around. We called out bullshit. Let's just quickly, in case you haven't checked it out, I'm going to open this right now. What did we do today? We called out the Globe story with the CSIS leak about the Indian interference in Pierre Poilievre's leadership campaign. We were like, yep, that's bullshit. We talked about Mark Carney's plan for car nationalism. That ain't gonna happen. Not for that price. That's not gonna happen. Like, I don't know what to tell you. We're not making the Maple Moose Mobile. The Canadian Lada is not a thing. It's not gonna happen for $2 billion. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This isn't a plan.
Sean Fraser deciding his kids don't deserve to have dad around.
Yeah. Daddy. I thought you said you were coming
Nope.
home.
Going back to Ottawa.
We talked a little bit about some of the Brookfield stuff. We talked a little bit about some of the really weird conspiratorial corners trying to tie Carney to the Ghislaine Maxwell. We talk a little bit about Danielle Smith and just how we just noted that she alone claims to be uniquely immune from having self-righteous temper tantrums.
Oh, Evan Solomon and or his campaign accidentally retweeting a spoof image without realizing it. No one looked and saw the extremely inappropriate language that was photoshopped into the image. So
that was just funny. That wasn't bullshit. It was just hilarious.
What?
Anyway, this is our first bullshit bulletin is unpaywalled. Are we going to keep those unpaywalled?
Yeah, we'll keep those unpaywalled.
We'll keep those unpaywalled. So they're a good way for you to be introduced to us if you are new to the line. They're very enjoyable. So come and check us out. That's again www.readtheline.ca. And thank you very much for listening to us ramble.
Coming up tomorrow, Saturday, our first written version of the anti-panel. So stay tuned for that as well. And God help us all. We'll talk to you in a week.